Something shifted this week, and it didn't happen on the field. It happened in front of microphones, cameras, and a whole lot of uncomfortable questions. After months of draft talk, criticism, and online narratives, both Shedeur Sanders and Coach Prime finally pushed back directly against how parts of the NFL and local media have talked about him. And now the conversation has gone from quiet frustration to open confrontation. During recent Super Bowl week media appearances, Shedeur didn't explode. He didn't rant. He didn't go scorched earth. Instead, he delivered a calm, controlled message that actually hit harder because of how measured it was. He basically said what most athletes never say out loud, that modern sports coverage is driven by clicks, engagement, and storylines, and that not everyone talking about a player actually knows that player. No shouting, no insults, just a pointed reality check. But then came the moment that really lit the fuse. Coach Prime stepped into an interview exchange that's now going viral, directly challenging a media voice about past draft cycle coverage and negative character claims that circulated about his son. In that exchange, he questioned how certain narratives spread so fast and why strong positive impressions didn't travel nearly as far. The word character became the center of the tension. Not stats, not arm strength, not reads, character. Now let's keep this grounded and fair. These are disputes over coverage and perception, not proven wrongdoing. Some reports, some opinions, some reactions. But when a high-profile player and a Hall of Fame father both publicly question the media narrative machine at the same time, that's not random noise. That's a signal that something behind the scenes has been bothering them for a while. And it also reopens a bigger question that fans argue about every draft season. How much of a prospect's reputation is built on verified evaluation? And how much is built on repeating labels until they stick? Because once you look back at the draft season storylines that followed Shedeur, you start to see exactly which narratives they're talking about, and why they believe those narratives crossed a line. Before a single pro snap was taken, the conversation around Shedeur Sanders had already turned into a storyline machine. Not just film breakdowns and scheme fits, but personality labels, interview rumors, and character debates that started circulating during the draft cycle. And according to many fan commentators and player supporters, that narrative wave grew faster than the verified facts behind it. During the pre-draft process, scattered reports and talk show segments questioned everything from his interview style to his confidence level. Some voices described him as overly bold. Others hinted, without hard sourcing, that certain team meetings didn't go smoothly. Small claims turned into repeated talking points. Repeated talking points turned into assumed truth. That's how draft season echo chambers work. Important to keep this fair. Not all criticism is fake, and not all praise is accurate. Draft evaluation always includes personality and leadership questions. That's standard across every position, especially quarterback. But what made this situation different, according to supporters, is how quickly opinion-based labels seem to solidify into reputation-level conclusions. You could see it in the language shift. Early coverage focused on mechanics, decision-making, and system translation. Later coverage started including tone words, attitude, arrogance, presence, vibe. Those are subjective terms, and once they enter the conversation, debate usually follows. What also added fuel was how fragmented the sourcing appeared. Some commentators cited unnamed insiders. Others referenced league buzz. Others simply reacted to what other shows had already said. That kind of circular reporting pattern often amplifies uncertainty instead of clarifying it. Through most of that stretch, Shedeur himself stayed publicly quiet. No daily rebuttals, no media fights, no social media blow-ups aimed at specific reporters, just football focus and standard interviews. And that silence, depending on who you ask, was either maturity or frustration held in check. But the quiet phase didn't last forever. Because once he got in front of microphones again during his recent media run, he addressed the narrative issue directly, and the way he framed it surprised a lot of people watching. When Shedeur Sanders finally addressed the media narrative talk during his recent interview run, a lot of viewers expected heat, frustration, maybe even direct callouts by name. Instead, what they got was something far more controlled and arguably more effective. He didn't attack reporters. He didn't list grievances. He reframed the entire situation in one simple idea: media runs on attention. In the clip now circulating across fan pages, Shedeur explained that modern coverage, especially sports and social media coverage, is driven by clicks, engagement, and reaction. Not always malice, not always accuracy, but incentives. He basically said you can't be shocked when people package stories in the most attention-grabbing way possible, because that's how their jobs are structured. That line hit hard because it wasn't emotional, it was analytical. He also made another point that supporters quickly highlighted. People who actually know him personally don't describe him the way some draft cycle narratives did. Teammates, coaches, and people who have spent time around him, according to his comments, already understand his personality and leadership style. In other words, proximity changes perception. Now, to keep this balanced, it's important to note that public figures are evaluated both on direct experience and professional scouting processes. Teams don't rely only on media clips. They run private interviews, background checks, and internal evaluations. So media narrative and team evaluation are not the same pipeline, but public reputation still matters, especially for quarterbacks. What made this response stand out is that Shedeur didn't claim a conspiracy. He didn't say everyone lied. He said, in essence, that the media ecosystem rewards strong angles, and strong angles often simplify complex people. That's a media literacy argument, not a personal attack. Many viewers described his tone as mature, measured, and strategic. Critics said it was deflection. Supporters said it was perspective. Either way, it shifted the temperature of the conversation. But while Shedeur kept his response composed, Coach Prime took a much more direct route. And that's the moment that turned this from discussion into confrontation. If Shedeur's response reset the tone, Coach Prime's moment reset the volume. Because during a Super Bowl week interview exchange that's now making the rounds online, he didn't speak in general terms. He challenged the media narrative head-on, in real time, with the reporter sitting right there. In that clip, Coach Prime questioned how negative draft season character stories about his son spread so widely, while positive first-hand impressions didn't get nearly the same amplification. He pressed the interviewer directly about past coverage impact, asking in plain language whether media appearances helped or hurt, and why strong on-air praise didn't seem to counterbalance later negative storylines. The most quoted flashpoint from that exchange is his use of the phrase character assassination, a heavy charge, and one that immediately escalated the stakes of the conversation. To be clear and fair, that phrase reflects his opinion and frustration, not a proven finding of wrongdoing. But in media terms, when a Hall of Fame figure uses language that's strong on camera, the clip is guaranteed to travel. And travel it did. Reaction split quickly. Supporters said he was holding media voices accountable for narrative-driven coverage and rumor amplification. Critics argued he was overstating the role of media in draft outcomes and ignoring how team evaluations actually work behind closed doors. Neutral analysts said the truth likely sits somewhere in the middle. Media narratives influence perception, but front offices rely primarily on private scouting data. What made the moment powerful wasn't just the accusation, it was the accountability angle. He wasn't talking about the media as a vague group. He was questioning a specific interaction pattern. If you publicly saw good character, why didn't that message carry equal weight later? That question hit a nerve because it exposes how modern coverage spreads. Negative hooks travel faster than balanced nuance. That's not unique to sports, but sports fans recognize it immediately. And once that clip went viral, the story stopped being just about draft coverage. It became about how sports narratives get built in the first place. Once this story moved beyond the viral clip, a bigger conversation opened up, not just about Shedeur Sanders, but about how sports narratives are formed in the first place. Because what Coach Prime and Shedeur are really pushing back on isn't one article or one segment, it's the snowball effect. Here, how that snowball usually starts. One report surfaces, often based on partial sourcing, draft chatter, or anonymous feedback. Then a debate show picks it up as a discussion topic. Then a reaction clip gets posted. Then fan channels respond. Then social media accounts summarize it in one sharp sentence. By the time it reaches the wider audience, the original nuance is gone and the label remains. Analysts sometimes call this label stacking. A phrase gets repeated enough times that it turns from speculation into assumed truth, not because it was proven, but because it was echoed. Confidence gets mistaken for confirmation. To keep this balanced, media isn't a single machine with one motive. There are beat reporters, film analysts, insiders, commentators, entertainers, and independent creators, all operating under different standards and incentives. Some prioritize verification. Some prioritize speed. Some prioritize engagement. Viewers often group them together, but the methods vary widely. Still, incentive structure matters. Strong takes outperform cautious takes. Sharp labels outperform long explanations. Controversy travels faster than context. That doesn't automatically make coverage dishonest, but it does shape what gets amplified. Quarterbacks feel this more than any other position. They're evaluated not just on performance, but on leadership, presence, confidence, and communication style. Those are partly measurable and partly interpretive. Interpretation is where narratives grow. This is why two scouts can watch the same interview and reach different conclusions, and why two shows can frame the same quote in opposite ways. Narrative lives in the framing, not just the facts. Which brings us to the next fault line in this debate, the gap between people who know a player personally and people who only know the public version. And that gap is exactly where this argument is now centered. Now the debate has shifted into something even more personal, the gap between first-hand experience and public perception. Supporters of Shedeur Sanders keep repeating the same core argument. The people who have actually been around him, teammates, coaches, staff, describe a very different person than the one some draft season narratives painted. That's a powerful claim, but it needs to be handled carefully and fairly. In multiple interviews and reactions, Shedeur and his defenders emphasize proximity. Their point is simple: direct interaction gives better judgment than distant commentary. If you've shared a locker room, run practices, or held long conversations, your evaluation carries a different kind of weight than someone reacting to clips and reports. That's a reasonable argument, and it resonates with fans who distrust headline-driven coverage. At the same time, scouts and evaluators would counter with their own truth. Professional assessment doesn't rely only on media stories. Teams conduct private interviews, background checks, psychological evaluations, and multi-layer scouting reports. So while media narratives shape public perception, they don't fully control team decisions. Both realities exist at once. What makes this situation volatile is when those two perception tracks collide. If public labels trend negative while insiders speak positively, fans assume injustice. If teams downgrade a prospect while media praise is high, fans assume hidden flaws. Either way, trust gets questioned. There's also a psychology factor here. Once a label attaches to an athlete, confident, arrogant, difficult, quiet, raw, polished, confirmation bias kicks in. Every new clip gets filtered through that label. Neutral behavior gets interpreted to match the narrative already chosen. That's not unique to sports, but it's extremely visible in quarterback coverage. Some commentators call this the first impression trap. Early storylines stick longer than later corrections. A rumor travels fast. A clarification travels slow. And that's exactly why narrative reversals are such a big deal. Because when performance or visibility shifts, watch how quickly certain voices change tone. Which leads to the next pressure point in this story: the media flip effect that fans are now watching very closely. One of the most talked about side debates coming out of this whole situation is what fans call the media flip effect. It's the idea that once a player starts trending upward, better performance, bigger spotlight, stronger results, some voices who were previously critical suddenly soften their stance or reverse it entirely. Fair or unfair? That perception is now part of the conversation around Shedeur Sanders. Supporters are encouraging fans to go back and compare timelines, what certain commentators said early in the draft cycle versus what they're saying now. Their claim is that tone shifts reveal who was evaluating and who was chasing momentum. That's an opinion-driven argument, but it's spreading fast across fan spaces. To keep this grounded, opinion changes are not automatically hypocrisy. Analysts are allowed to update evaluations when new film, new behavior, or new results appear. In fact, good analysis should evolve with evidence. The problem, according to critics, is when revisions happen without acknowledging the earlier stance. That's what creates distrust. There's also an incentive layer here. Rising players generate audience interest. Audience interest generates traffic. Traffic shapes coverage priority. That doesn't require bad intent. It's just how attention markets function. But viewers are more aware of it now than ever, which is why they're watching consistency more closely. Quarterback coverage especially tends to swing in extremes. Early doubt can turn into hype. Early hype can turn into backlash. The cycle repeats every season. What makes this case different is that the player and his most influential advocate, his father, publicly pushed back on the narrative process itself. That puts the spotlight not just on performance, but on coverage behavior. Some analysts say this moment could actually help reset how certain outlets frame young quarterbacks, forcing more caution before personality labels get repeated. Others say the cycle won't change at all, only the names will. Either way, the microscope is now pointed both directions, at the player and at the people covering the player. Which brings us to the bigger forward-looking question: why this narrative battle actually matters for what happens next on the field. Here's the part most people miss. This isn't just about hurt feelings, headlines, or media debates. Narrative momentum can actually change how a young quarterback is treated inside the league ecosystem. Not officially, not on paper, but in very real ways. Quarterbacks don't develop in a vacuum. They develop inside storylines. How coaches answer questions about them, how broadcasters frame their mistakes, how quickly analysts label a rough stretch as normal growth versus a red flag. That framing influences patience levels from fans, from locker rooms, and sometimes even from decision makers. Right now, Shedeur Sanders is in a rare position. He's not just fighting for wins, he's fighting to reset the lens people use to judge him. And based on recent interviews, he seems to understand that clearly. Instead of directly attacking critics, he's taken a calmer route, saying people have jobs to do, clicks to chase, and narratives to build. That kind of response lowers conflict temperature while still calling out the system. It's controlled, and that matters. Because here's what usually happens next. Once a player publicly addresses narrative pressure without melting down, the evaluation bar shifts. Critics get more careful. Supporters get louder. Coverage becomes more watchful. Every performance then carries double weight, not just for the scoreboard, but for the storyline correction arc. But that wasn't the whole twist. Pressure moments are coming, and they will test whether this reset sticks. One bad game after a media dispute can bring old labels roaring back. One great game can bury them permanently. That's the volatility zone he's walking into. And what makes this even more interesting is how his inner circle, especially Coach Prime, is choosing to handle the confrontation side of the equation publicly. Because the father's strategy is very different from the son, And that contrast might be the most powerful part of this entire story. Step back and look at the full picture, and you'll see this story was never just about a few bad reports or tense interviews. It's about how modern athlete narratives are built, challenged, and sometimes rewritten in real time, with cameras rolling and fans watching every move. Shedeur Sanders chose the composed route. He didn't go nuclear. He didn't start naming names. He framed criticism as part of the media job and kept his focus on performance and character. That approach protects locker room credibility and keeps organizational trust intact. It also signals maturity, which matters more to teams than viral clapbacks ever will. Coach Prime, on the other hand, played the enforcer role. He confronted the framing directly, questioned the coverage, and forced at least one media voice to publicly acknowledge that damaging claims had spread too far. That contrast, calm quarterback, confrontational father, created a balanced pressure response instead of a chaotic one. It's strategic whether intentional or not. But here's the truth most viewers already understand. None of this will matter if the on-field results don't back it up. Narrative debates expire fast when the film is decisive. Strong performances erase doubt. Weak stretches revive it. That's the reality of quarterback life at the highest level. There's also a bigger lesson here for fans and creators alike. Coverage is louder than ever. Opinions travel faster than facts. Early labels stick harder than they should. That's why smart viewers now track consistency, not just hot takes. They watch.